Welcome to Chapter 2 of The Ocean's Epic with Bert terHart. I recorded my conversations with Bert in December 2020 after he'd been home for about 4 months. When not doing stuff like sailing around the world, Bert helps businesses with social media web-based tech support. He's educated as a physicist in ocean and atmospheric sciences. He volunteers here on Gabriola and elsewhere as a sailing instructor. He's got a triple black belt in Taekwondo, and he was a Special Forces officer in the Canadian military. Reading this aloud now, an interesting sidebar, is his wife Nani is a hula dance master, coming from Hawaiian-Canadian roots here on the southern BC Gulf Coast Islands, because, back in the days of the great sailing ships, quite a few Hawaiian sailors settled on these islands. Maybe it felt a bit like Maui North. But anyway, I'm thinking, Bert, what, no hula dance credentials? Not even ballroom or tap dance? What does he do with his time? Leading off this chapter, here we get into a discussion about really, essentially, lonely versus being alone. And the interesting connection that so many people made with a chance gift by a friend just before he left on this voyage from Victoria. A friend gave him a little stuffed seal that he nicknamed Salty McMayday, and he refers to Salty in this next passage.
Why do people like Salty? And I said, okay, maybe it's because everybody can relate to having a stuffed animal, no matter how old you are. They all have something that's...
Something they can latch on to when they're looking at your experience.
Correct. And they go, well, he's walking around with a stuffed animal, I can relate to that. So there was, and I thought, okay, well, it sounds trivial, and I don't want to make it sound trite, but I think that has a lot to do with it, because it's the only thing that people can relate to.
Yeah.
It is really, and I had the same discussion with a guy who cycled from Pierre, South Dakota to the North Pole on a mountain bike. Interesting cat.
Yeah, I would think.
And we said to me, when you get back, Bert, you're going to be, talking about this. People will be asking about you, and they'll just be this sort of blank stare that you'll never get past. It's not anything personal. It's how can they relate to that?
Yeah.
So most people can't relate to, getting on a bike and going here on Gabriola to the village. Like, oh my God, why would you do that?
Yeah. It seems like so long.
It's so long, and you might die. So we got helmets and flashers and vests, and hand signals. Yeah. But I'm going to ride to the North Pole. Okay, that's a little, you're not right in the head. So he said that it's a really, really hard thing to relate to. And I thought, that's interesting. I thought about that, because it's hard to relate to when you say, well, what did you do in the Army? Well, I jumped out of airplanes. They go, people think, well, most people don't think that's a good idea, right?
Yeah. It's the worst case scenario idea.
Yeah.
Right? Just like doing this trip. It's like, well, okay, if my partner dropped overboard, I guess I'm sailing on my own.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. Or you can frame it any way. There's all different ways to frame it. There's no other sign of humanity. There's no contrails in the sky. There's no other ships. Yeah. The nearest person is the International Space Station. You don't see any satellites because they tend to be on other orbits somewhere. So you are utterly alone, which is different than being lonely. But
you wrote about that in one of your blog entries as well.
So you're utterly alone. But and that, all you have is you, right? So if there's no other distraction except you. And eventually all those distractions that form me here living in Gabriola are gone. And I'm existing, right? Because I have to eat, but I have to sleep. I'm doing the most basic things. And the boat has to keep going, that sort of thing. But pretty soon that's kind of it.
Yeah.
The telephone isn't ringing, there's no work. So the only thing I'm doing right there is you construct your life so that you can function. As I said earlier, you can function as optimally as humanly possible in that moment, because clearly you're trying to look ahead and plan ahead and see ahead, and so you're not driving over the cliff kind of thing. But, but it's just right there, and that's And I think I agree. I would agree. There's, there was. I'm sure people would recognize that and think, "Wow, that's," But it isn't why I set out to do it.
It's also interesting to note that Bert didn't have any music with him on board, and he said to me it was something that is just not in him in terms of what he needs, and it would be a distraction in doing the work he needs to do, and possibly maybe draining the battery unnecessarily.
Talking about mindfulness and how I think people can relate to that, especially there's a focus, on trying to live in the moment and all those things. People have you hear that a lot, but we had talked about, reducing everything to the simplest, to the one simple thing that you can do right now. And that by necessity drives you into the moment, because you can't say, well, I'll put my boots on in 10 minutes. That's not going to help, right? Mm-hmm. Or because the 10 minutes rolls into the next 10 minutes to the next to the next. It's just a license to procrastinate. So you've got to do what I can do right now. Like, what can I do right now? So you're forced into that moment. And what I hadn't expected when I left was I would spend pretty much that entire trip in the moment. And you get for me anyway, I found that I was constantly peeling away layers. I called it shedding layers of, for lack of a better word, I guess, civilization, or shedding layers of yourself, literally yourself. Mm-hmm. So that you're being driven deeper and deeper and deeper into the concept of the moment. And I would argue that it's impossible to do living in Vancouver or even in Gabriola. There's just too much going on right now. So here we are living in the moment. The phone rings. So you're automatically sucked out of it. Yeah. Or I hear the fire ticking, or I'm cold, or the light's on, or whatever the case might be. There's so many things that you take for granted that are part of your everyday existence I'm not saying they're bad. I'm just saying that they're completely integrated in how you're living your life. And then all those things get stripped away, layer by layer by layer. And I found sort of by the time I was in the Southern Indian Ocean that I had the things that were important to me, I felt were really, really fundamental to my concept of self and what was driving me and who was important in my life and what was important in my life and those kinds of things. And it took a long time to get there. And I think it took which isn't to say that other people couldn't get there quicker, but maybe that's why it takes in Siddhartha, maybe that's why it took him a lifetime, to get to the place where he was enlightened. Right. Yeah. Because I don't think it's easy to get out of the moment. I think it's really hard. Mm-hmm. And eventually you get to this place where you're just completely surrounded by the moment. That's all there is. There's no 10,000 miles left. There's no weather coming tomorrow. There's not anything I have to do. Yourself is in the moment. And the world is a vastly different place looking at it from that perspective. And I think if you read the blog, because I actually haven't gone back and read any of it. But I remember as I was writing, then I would be just overcome by moments, right? And they would be really small. They'd be really tiny things. And there might have been a snippet that somebody had sent me because I'm reading that right at that moment, and that's completely and utterly integrated into what I'm doing. I think it was one of the unadulterated joys of the trip is being able to live like that. And it's not just live like that, because I mean live in the most profound sense. You're because it's like I'm living on Gabriola. Yeah. That doesn't mean anything, right? Because I can live anywhere. Yeah. Right. Yeah. But and you had said yourself when you had you're traveling to another country and you step off the end of the platform and suddenly you're living in that place, and that place is suddenly you're just sucked into that moment, and it's unbelievably powerful because there'll be other influences. I want to say forces there, but there'll be other things moving you. Well, that's the definition of a force. There'll be other things moving you there. So clearly I'm in this place out in the middle of the ocean where all there is nature. That's all there is there. Mm-hmm. there's not many other creatures. The ocean is pretty much, the open ocean is pretty much a desert. So
right.
There's a
but
lot
you
of,
did get some chances, like
oh yeah,
some
there's lots of bird life.
Right.
Like so there's
albatross.
There's lots of albatross, and they're otherworldly. Like they're living in two different places. They live above the water and in the water and on the water.
Yeah.
So they have this unbelievable existence. And the thing about, which, speaking of birds,
Yeah.
the most numerous birds are smaller than the palm of my hand. They're there by the hundreds of thousands. So you have this tiny, so you're getting just thrashed, right? And you go, oh, but no, poor me. And you look out on the water, and there's a little tiny bird that spends like 3 years at sea, and they're the size that they're in the palm of your hand, and they're out there in the worst, wildest, craziest weather. C.S. Lewis, there's one of my favorite quotes is a small bird will drop frozen dead from a bough without ever having felt sorry for itself.
In this next section, before I hit the record button, we were talking about, I think most people can relate to, that there are a handful of places that you may go to or visit or walk through that most people could probably describe, that just fills their heart with joy and makes their spirits soar like a hawk. And I asked him to think about what part of the world in all of this sailing that he did made him feel that way.
There was a time when I was in the southern Indian Ocean, and I got to know Randall Reeves a little bit, another solo sailor, far more accomplished than me. And he loved the Southern Ocean. Everyone who's been there, they love it, because he described it as such an alien place. And it's alien in every way that you can think of it as being alien, because an alien place is a place where humans typically don't go very often. Like the moon is an alien place. Mm-hmm. And in fact, more people have been to the moon than have sailed around the world using celestial navigation nonstop, to give you some idea of how tough it is. Mm-hmm. And I remember being in the Southern Indian Ocean, I was having this love-hate relationship with the place because the weather was horrible, and then it'd be really nice and horrible and really nice. And I got out one morning and looked out, and I thought, wow, this is just the most beautiful, beautiful place in the world. It is it's like another world, a truly an alien place. And at that moment I realized those weren't my words, they were Randall Reeves' words. Right. And and I thought about that, and I realized how my short conversation with him had imbued me with something that was really profound. Mm-hmm. And that's the same experience in some ways I had with people who were following me on the blog, or would send a little snippet, and even then I haven't read them all, or any of them actually, because I want to preserve that,
Yep.
And for the people who followed me and were cheering me on for sort of some nice simple way to put it, just knowing that, and that isn't why I left, and just knowing that was something that was incredibly powerful. And when I realized it sitting there in the Indian Ocean, is one of my favorite places actually, when there was that moment, how profoundly I had been imbued with that very short interaction with someone like Randall, and then the very similar interactions I had with other people. I realized how important they were to me as a human, right? As a member of this species. Mm-hmm. How important that was for us to share what it is to be human, and to share what it is to share what the human condition actually is. And that's one of the nice things about living in the moment. When you begin to shed all these things that are, I won't say irrelevant, but aren't necessarily important, even though you're sort of stripping yourself bare, you realize that there's a lot more to you than just you. And there's a lot of things that are way bigger than you, and there's a lot of things that are smaller than you, but still incredibly important to you. So it was a really wonderful way to kind of fit all the different pieces of the puzzle together right in that moment. Yeah. And I think it's a pretty hard place to get to, and it's worth looking for, which is why I say that. It's one of my favorite quotes. The lure of the distant and difficult is deceptive. The great opportunity is where you are. That's by a guy by the name of John Burroughs, an American essayist and naturalist, written around the turn of the the 19th century. The opportunity is where you are physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually, right at that moment. That's where the opportunity lies. It doesn't lie at the other end of the earth. You don't need to sail around the world to discover that at all.
You spoke of the little seabirds that you saw in the middle of nowhere, and you went through chunks of the oceans that were more or less biologically not, at least at the surface. You're not seeing a lot. There are zones, right? Of anything stand out for great natural phenomena or critters or things that went, oh my God, look at this.
Yeah, but besides the albatross, everyone talks about. I mean, it's the bird life is absolutely magnificent. It is a pure joy and an absolute wonderment to see how incredibly well adapted these creatures are, because they just seem to fit perfectly into that space. And humans, which I think every one of us is a bit of a square peg in a round hole. People will go, what's my purpose in life? What should I be doing? But an albatross is not asking those questions. And not because I don't think they're not important questions, but they fit so perfectly. So that's one thing, because you don't see them, and they're huge. An albatross is they're like the wingspan is they're enormous. And they're curious.
2-3 meter, right?
Yeah, they're and they love the boat. They're not at all afraid. So as soon as it's calm, as soon as you're becalmed, they park right beside the boat. So they're there. They're always there. Unfortunately, there's very few whales. There used to be, the albatross population has been decimated by squid fishery, so that's 1 in 10.
Yeah.
So there, be 10 times more. The marine mammals are probably far worse than that. So if you read accounts of other people who've been through that part of the world, they're frequently, they're visited a lot by whales. The only time I saw whales was I saw them twice, basically, which was a shame. Because if you go north here on the BC coast, you're surrounded by whales. There's humpback whales everywhere. There's killer whales. There's minke whales. There's right whales. They're just
crazy.
But only here. But if you go in the middle of the ocean, they're gone. So, but I did have 1 or 2 encounters with whales that were very much like the encounters I've had with killer whales up in Haida Gwaii and in the Gulf of Alaska. They're incredibly curious about you. They'll, in one case, and this happened before with killer whales as well, but it was coming down in the South Pacific just after I'd gotten, I think, around the Tropic of Capricorn, and I noticed there was one whale that was scoping the boat out. Literally, they're very, very careful. So they're on one side of the boat, they're on the other side of the boat, they're in front of you, they're behind you, and you can hear them, echoing the boat or sonifying the boat. He rushes off, and I look off, to the, in this case it was to the right, and there's like 4 or 5 other guys over there. And he has a conversation with his buddies, and the next thing you know, there's 4 whales. And then they all rush off, leaving one guy behind, and then there's 15, and they all rush over. So one guy goes and tells 4, then 4 guys go over and tell their friends, It's like a multi-level marketing meeting out there. And then they're incredibly curious. The young and the old ones, and you right away. There's no doubt that they're intelligent. There's no doubt that they're curious. There's no doubt that they're having a conversation. There's no doubt that they want to know, because they're looking. Literally, the water's so clear. It's like you and I looking at each other. They're rolling over on one side with one big eyeball staring.
I've seen
at
that with dolphins too.
Yeah, dolphins exactly.
They slow right down and look up at you, and you're looking at them, and give them a little hello.
So that's extraordinary, and it was a shame that you don't, because I've had whales follow the boat for hours and hours and hours going up north.
Yeah,
and coming, you'll see them miles away, literally maybe a mile away with the spout. And then they'll come rushing towards the boat, and they'll park there until it gets dark. So you spend like 4 hours, with this whale in company, and he figures, why not? And it was a shame because I was looking forward to that. But the other thing I think the most fascinating creatures are the flying fish. They are just extraordinary. It's just one of those things that you got to shake. Even a flying fish just sounds wrong, a fish that flies.
Yeah.
No. Yes. And they're flying. They're not just sort of gliding around.
Yeah. They're not just it's a leap out of the water, a breach. They're actually flying.
No. They come bolting out of the water, and with their wings, and they're, I don't know, it's like a hummingbird. The wing beat is just phenomenal.
The sound. Yeah.
And then you can see them once they get a little more airspeed, then they just peel off in the wind. And I've had them go over top of the boat.
Wow. Just a little producer's note here. You cannot believe how hard it is to find some kind of audio for flying fish that doesn't have some ridiculous soundtrack or somebody yapping over the top of the actual sound of the flying fish. And it's also amazing to note that they can fly out of the water for hundreds of meters at a time, sometimes stringing together that by taxiing with their tails to stretch out the entire above water journey with just a little bit ducking underneath into almost a kilometer.
So they're not just like 6 inches off the surface of the water.
And they're what's kind of size too? They're fairly big.
They can grow to be about a foot, and they're very fast.
Yeah.
And the numbers of them are extraordinary. And then there's the birds that feed on them.
Right.
And it's amazing to watch those guys fly.
Mm-hmm.
Just amazing to see. It's a work of art, actually.
Yeah.
It's a work of art to see this sort of beautiful dance between them. In the blog, there's this bird, PJ, who was living on the boat for a while, and that's all he did was catch flying fish. And he's like, you're holding your smartphone there. That's how far away we were for, basically a week. And he's looking at me, and I'm looking at him, and I fed him a couple of flying fish because he ended up on the deck.
Right.
So
did you eat any of the stuff? No.
No, I thought I would.
Yeah.
I don't. By the time I got to them, they'd been on the deck for a while. So I threw them back.
Yeah.
And I fed when I had the opportunity. I fed them to PJ, but.
The last thing you need is like the sushi food poisoning story on your boat.
Yeah. So I didn't. Yeah.
So and that speaks to the sounds and the sights. Like, and I know obviously you've had the sounds of the gale, the wind, the boat, all of that as well. I know from other long-time sailors too that when you were getting close to land, could you smell the land?
Oh yeah.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah. You can see it from a long ways off because you can see the clouds over top of the.
Right.
But what is interesting and what I hadn't expected as well is that you're looking out at the ocean all the time. You're looking at the ocean. You're looking at the ocean. You're looking at the ocean, and pretty soon, anything that doesn't belong there sticks out like a sore thumb.
Right. The anomaly.
Yeah. And it is unbelievably. It is incredibly. It was really interesting to me to see how unbelievably accurate you would be. And I've only been there for a very short period of time. And you wonder how these birds can see what they see. And then you realize, well, maybe a couple 100,000 years or maybe 1 million years of evolution might have something to say about that. Because after 9 months that you've been looking out, you don't even think you're looking. You go, that's not right. Yeah, piece of plastic. And you get really, really good at it.
Yeah.
So that was one of the things that I found really surprising. And I remember traveling with my dad when we were a kid. We'd be driving down the prairie, and my dad would go, "Oh, look at the fox." What are you talking about? Because my dad drove through the prairies decades. So when you're driving through the prairies, like my brother would say about the prairies, is there's not much to look at, but a lot to see.
Mm-hmm. That's a beautiful way to put it.
Yeah. So I said, what fox? Yeah, it's back there, past it. But he'd been looking at the prairies for God knows how long, and you get to be like you'd be amazed at how unbelievably acute you get to those things, or aware of those things that don't quite fit in. So,
fascinating.
Yeah, to be honest, you asked me a question before that, and I got a little bit sidetracked. So, what was it? How did we quite get there?
Yeah, the things that naturally in that journey would have left you a little gobsmacked to say, "Oh my God, I'm glad I'm out here to see this." Yeah.
It's so that it was. I think that was it. It was the fact that you out of the corner of your eye, you'll see this little tiny flicker, and you look over there, and sure enough, it's a school of flying fish that have just come out. And you and I are talking like this, and it happens over there. And somehow you get this awareness,
Mm-hmm.
So that is a real. It's what's one of those things about living in the moment, actually, because if you're actually immersed in the moment, then that means that everything that's going on around you in that moment is also part of you. So you can't live in the moment staring at your iPhone, because that ain't the moment, right? Right behind you, there's There's a lot more going on besides what's here.
Mm-hmm.
So if maybe this is a poor example, right? But part of being in the moment out there is that suddenly you get your awareness just starts to get broader and broader and broader.
Right.
Even though, it sounds, I don't want to make it sound contradictory, but your sort of awareness is getting broader, but your focus is sharpening to what's going on just right at that moment.
Well, for me, I think framing thinking about your journey and following your blog, and after I had come back from traveling, the last leg we did was flying from Rarotonga, the Cook Islands, and it's a crazy liftoff because there's always this sheer wind across the end of the island, and they do this like it's almost like a bush pilot, fly out, and then they just do a sharp turn. But we left in the evening, and it was a full moon, clear night, so. And I'm not the kind of person to put the blind down and take a pill and fall asleep. I'm always awake on a plane, and I never cease to be, stare out in wonderment wherever I can and however long I can. And flying out of there, going all that time, and seeing, horizon to horizon, nothing but the great South Pacific, and then nodding off, and now all of a sudden, you're flying into the dawn, and then it's bright again, and you're still looking at nothing but ocean and nothing. Like I'm staring, and there's no ships. I'm not seeing anything yet. Like it's just so immense. And I mean, now that you're home, like I just think you must think, my God, I was this little mote on the water in the middle of nowhere for so long, and I mean, you don't. It's nice to look back and be amazed by the fact that you were there. But I mean, in the moment, your head's down and you're doing the work you need to do each day to stay alive and keep the boat moving, right? But now, do you look back and go, yeah, I did it. I'm glad I did that.
It's really hard to put it into perspective. I mean, the focus is never. Well, you'd wake up in the morning and I'd go, how far is it, to home? 18,000 nautical miles is good. That sounds impossible, right? How are you going to do 18,000 nautical miles? And it's through the Southern Ocean, and it's going to be nothing but, gales and misery. Because if it's not blowing like crazy, then there's no wind. And then that's even worse.
Yeah, and you spoke about that in one of the blogs about being becalmed. It's a nightmare.
Yeah, so I was becalmed more than 50 days, so that's equivalent of almost 6,000 miles.
Right, and that's
You're going nowhere.
And to explain technically, I mean, so that's just no wind, but you still got swell and chop, and
so
you're
the
being
wind,
tossed around, and you can't steer really.
There's no steering. Yeah. You just sit there and get beat. Yeah. So there's no wind, so the boat is unstable. Usually, if there's some wind, then the boat gets pinned over in one position, one way or the other. Of course, the motion is still extreme, but it's not chaotic. As soon as the wind shuts off, the waves are still there. It just gets the motion down there just gets crazy.
Right. Yeah.
So, but you don't look at 18,000 miles. Yes. It's impossible. But you can look at going the next 100 yards. So you can sail around the world. It's something a little faster than a slow walk if you do it sort of one step at a time. So you just I'm focused on the next 100 meters, the next mile. So I can sail. I can go another mile. So I would have that conversation. I can go another mile, but you have it in other contexts beyond that. So clearly, you want to optimize everything about your trip. So you want to optimize how the boat is sailing. How much rest you're getting, how much energy you're expending, how much food you're eating. So there's this constant. So as soon as I left the dock, I'm running out of everything. So as soon as you flip off that line, I'm running out of food. I'm running out of water. I'm wearing the boat out. I'm running out of fuel. So I'm not just. I'm wearing the batteries down, which means that there's a certain number of life cycles I have. So you're immediately, it's driving everything to zero. So you need to optimize to make sure that you get back. It's all in one piece. So so you have this conversation. I can do. I can maybe do this a little bit better. So maybe if I get up and I change course, 3, 4, 5, maybe 6 degrees, I might be going a little bit faster. Or maybe I'll just miss this. I'll go around this particular little patch of weather. Or maybe the movement will be just a little better, and I can actually get some sleep. So you're constantly sort of optimizing all the variables that you have control over.
Yeah.
And that's how you get around the world. It's how you do anything, actually. It's not just getting around the world.
Yeah.
And that's easy, very easy to relate to.
Yeah, and that's part of the inspiring message with this too, is because I think a lot of people, magnify problems in their lives, and they don't realize that you just got to break it down into those little steps and little bits of progress along the way. Yeah.
So the Zoom sort of talks I've given, I focus on that, and that is that the crux of it is that no matter how difficult the situation, no matter how dire the circumstance, whether you're just absolutely being crushed by everything around you, you can always find the one thing, the very simplest, easiest one thing that you can do now that will get you to maybe the next step and the next step and the next step. So a good example might be to get my boots on to go outside would sometimes take 20 minutes. Mm-hmm. So you're lying there strapped down. It's just, it's the conditions are interesting, let's say. I don't want to exaggerate. And you got to do something because it's always changing, and you think, I know that I expect it's going to get worse. I should probably, do something, whether it's change course or whether add a little sail, take some sail off, go outside, look, whatever the case might be. That sounds trivial, but it takes an hour to get outside. Right. And in that hour, you're just being ping-ponged around the inside of the boat. Yeah. So there's lots of psychology behind it. There's lots of, economists have talked about this. And that sort of thing where you want to be doing, where there's a certain amount of inertia associated with what you're doing now, that's not actually killing you, humans tend to think that's a pretty good idea. For soldiers, I'm sort of digressing, but for soldiers, it's something called shoot and scoot. So if I shoot where I am now, then everyone knows where I am. So if I stay here, I'm most certainly going to get shot. But I'm not dead yet. And I'm pretty safe because I'm hiding behind this rock, even though I know that everyone else knows where I am. So the smartest thing to do is to go somewhere else. But you have to expose yourself. You have to get up and do something unsafe so that you can become safe again. But now I'm safe. So it's called activity inertia, and companies do it all the time. And you typically respond by doing the same thing more energetically. So, say for example, you're trying to run away from an accelerating car. So you can run in the same direction, and you can run as fast as you want, like do the same thing more energetically.
Yeah, like in the movies, run over. Right? The classic movie scene.
How come the person doesn't, make the 90, right?
Yeah, no one does.
No one figures that out. So that's very common. So you have to overcome this activity inertia, and it's really hard because getting dressed is really tough. Eating something, so I got to eat something. Yeah. But just doing that, you actually sometimes have to put all your foul weather gear on to stand in front of the stove because whatever you're cooking might be wearing it. Yeah. So, but you can reduce what has to be done right now to one very, very simple thing. Like I got to get outside. That's going to take me an hour. I can't get an hour. By that time, I'll be exhausted. It's already 1 o'clock in the morning, and then it'll be like 0 dark 30, and it'll be horrific. I may as well stay inside. Maybe I can get my boots on, and if I got to get outside, I got to get my boots on, and that's the first thing that has to happen because you can't go outside without everything else. But you got to have something like so. I can get my boots on. So you get your boots on. You go. Well, what's next? So you have this cascade of very, very simple things, right? And that builds momentum, and you get. You can I shouldn't say waylay, but you can deal with the fears that you can't help but sort of be surrounded. You're swimming in this sea of fear. You're never isolated from it. And to say people say they're not afraid, they're lying. So you're focused on the immediate.
Why for you was...
I've been asked why a lot.
Of course.
I devolved at one point to say, why not? Why not do something extraordinary? And then I would stop talking and look. Yeah. And then people would think, oh, wow, how deep that is. But actually all I'm trying to do is blow the question off because I'm so tired of answering it. So, which is an unfair answer, right? Well, it's relevant because, I mean, there's an argument. I can make you a really good argument for why not, but I've got to get there first, right? So if I just say that, I've not given you any evidence or any logic as to why that might make sense. Yeah. We talked at the very beginning about sort of the practical goals, to motivate people, to pursue dreams and adventures, to motivate kids, to like I'm not young, like I'm 63 now, no, 62. So age really shouldn't be an excuse, right?
Yeah.
The philosophical reason I did it was, so bear with me here, that I believe that extraordinary is vastly different than what most other people would describe or define extraordinary. To me, extraordinary is, by definition, a tiny little bit different than ordinary. Just a wee tiny shade, right? Mm-hmm. And if you multiply those wee tiny shades by 1,000,000, you end up being extraordinary. So we humans, to generalize, are drawn to the extravagant, the huge, the giant extraordinary, like the extraordinary hockey player, the extraordinary athlete, the extraordinary violinist, the the piano virtuoso, the extraordinary theoretical physicist. But they didn't get that way except taking all these little tiny extra little steps, right?
Yeah.
It's like Gladwell talking about 10,000 hours.
That's right, yeah.
So how do you get to this giant extraordinary? You get there by taking all these little tiny wee steps. And that's the message that I wanted to be able, because people are going to be drawn to the fact that I sailed around the world by myself and I chose to do it in the most difficult way possible. But the message I want to tell you, and this is the philosophical why, because I wouldn't be having this conversation with you if I actually didn't sail around the world. So I wouldn't have the opportunity to say, this is my philosophy. And I've talked the same sort of, I've given this, my vision of extraordinary, to business groups in Vancouver. And a really good example is Mother Teresa. Like, she didn't start out as a saint. She just decided that I'm going to step out of the convent because I think there's something where I'm not doing as much as I could. Yeah. I'm going to help the first person I see. Yeah. That's it. That was the beginning of her journey. The first person that she helped was a leper, that she got some shelter and a meal, and somebody saw her do that and gave her £50 British.
Yeah.
So that was the start of her journey. So she chose to just step out the door of her convent. Yeah. All her other sisters didn't, but she did. So her journey to extraordinary began as a tiny wee bit extra. So my point is, I believe really, really strongly in that. Then you can have these extraordinary adventures if I step out the front door here in Gabriola, because about once a week kids will come by and they'll have their little nets and they'll be scooping up tadpoles and dragonfly nymphs in the ditch where there's water. Yeah. So they're on this giant adventure, this huge extraordinary thing on this voyage of discovery. It's just out their front door. It's how I grew up, actually.
Yeah.
And we lose sight of that because we are so focused on, LeBron James, and so focused on, say, Eric Weinstein, a theoretical physicist. But they get there in these little tiny steps. Mm-hmm. That's how I sailed around the world. I did this extraordinary thing by walking ever so slowly around the world.
Or there's the temptation with people too, just not to break your thought here too, but that there's got to be a shortcut, right? A lot of people think, oh well, if only I can, get the degree on the back of a matchbox, that kind of thing, right? Yeah. What's the easy way? Yeah. And the truth is, there is no easy way.
No, there are no shortcuts. I had that I'd written that down actually on one of the things to go out to the boat. To get outside, I had this thing that said stop, think, and then beneath that there are no shortcuts, because you are constantly looking for shortcuts, but there aren't any. So this thing about extraordinary is that I wanted to have a sort of a platform to say this is what I believe in, because I believe in it really strongly, and I think it's a message that's worth repeating. And I'm not the first person by any stretch of the imagination.
Well, I think that's just a fabulous insight into what is extraordinary. And remembering his mom, who he described as a person who did small, extraordinary things her entire life. Bert gave me another example. He said, just even going into a school or a senior's home and reading.
Do you think I could come in on Thursdays and read? I'll just read out of a book. Like I'll give you 5 books and I'll just come in there and read. Do you not think that the residents of that particular facility would love that? And do you not think that, and that's a small thing to read for half an hour, that's like it doesn't cost you anything. It's completely trivial. You get the books for free from the library or download them from Gutenberg, for nothing. But the effect that you would have on those people would be extraordinary. That little tiny thing. And then imagine how you would feel if you walked out of there knowing that you had a positive impact on those, say, 10, 15 people just by reading like a chapter out of The Great Gatsby or something, right?
Yeah.
And imagine you went back there the next week and the next week, you did it for a month. How different you would be, how different the lives of those people would be, and how bigger your heart would feel. And it's nothing.
Yeah.
Anyone, it doesn't have to be reading a book. It could be anything,
Yeah.
right? We have all these opportunities constantly in front of us to live an extraordinary life, and we just walk by them because we think that we think of extraordinary as this thing that's way out there. It's beyond, it's beyond. It's the overnight success, right?
Yeah.
The one-hit wonder.
Yeah.
And how the universe, kind of fits all the pieces of the puzzle together.
Yeah.
Because I don't believe we're here just stumbling along.
Yeah.
To be honest, I don't believe that.
I hope you enjoyed listening to these two parts as much as I enjoyed being with Bert. And I'm sure you're probably thinking, why didn't he ask this or that? Well, hey, you do the best you can in the time you've got. Thank you for listening. I always like hearing your comments, so do drop me an email or a Facebook message. Bye for now.